Thank you for joining us on this Foundations for Heart Change video. This video is titled The One Thing, Obedience. Even in the title, it's kind of a mystery. The one thing, first of all, what is it? And how could one thing actually make a difference? It's interesting, but working with recovery, so many people come in with a one thing. They don't see it that way, but if I just get a job, everything will be fine. If I just find the right partner, everything will be fine. If I can just stay away from these people, everything will be fine. Well, I do believe there is a one thing, but it's not the kinds of things that people typically focus on. Today we have with us Levi and Heather. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to jump right in again today. Levi, as you showed up in the program again, you had no idea of any of what we're talking about. But you had a one thing that absolutely made a difference in your life.
When I got here, I had 3 behaviors that I really wanted to change and had multiple failed attempts. I wanted to quit hitting people, I wanted to quit pounding booze, and I wanted to quit shooting dope. And I thought if I quit doing all those 3 things, that life would just be grand. Regardless of what I tried, I couldn't make myself stop any of those 3 things. So when I got here, I'd come to a real place of brokenness. My life had got really rough. My mom had passed away. I'd burned a lot of relationships. I had felony charges hanging out, and nothing I tried was working. And so when I got here, I really knew that I was not capable of changing myself, and I was really willing to try something outside of me. And that something was to be accountable, to be diligent to rules, to do what I was asked. It was pretty basic. Just do the things asked of me, do the next right thing, and that's what I knew to do.
It's interesting, and we'll find this out as we go through the video, but that just happens to line up perfectly with what you needed to do to get better. You were in your one thing, it produced a good outcome, and we'll describe that as the video goes on. Heather, you also had a one thing that kind of slapped you in the face, so to speak. It was kind of like, what?
Yeah, it made no sense to me. It seemed so simplistic at first, but early on, Pastor had given me some words of wisdom, which I don't even know if you called it one thing yet, but he just told me, drop the vision and be right where you are right now. And it seemed so like, what are you talking about? The first thing that I noticed was that I was constantly looking at the clock, and I had nowhere to be. I mean, I had nowhere to go. I'm sitting in class and I'm constantly looking at the clock, like as if I've got something to do. And I wasn't able to rest and be still. So that was the first thing that I noticed. So I started practicing obedience to not watching the clock. Just very simple little things, and just be still and don't look at the clock. Look at whoever's talking. Look at, whatever it is that I'm doing right here. Just be right here, right now. And that started an unfolding where I began to see that this was a way that I had been trying to fix my life on my own will for a very long time by maintaining control, by being 3 steps ahead of everything, so that bad things don't happen to me, trying to protect myself. It was also a way that I stayed in a place of hopefulness because I had a hard life. And if I could have a vision, I can fix this, I can achieve this, I don't have to look at the wreck that is inside of me. And I recognize that that is what I'd been running from my whole life.
Heart change. What you just said there, until I begin to focus on the wreck that's inside of me, or let's change it to a more positive vision, the call of God and how to walk out that call of God to live in my purpose, until I'm able to focus on that, it is going to be divided. It's going to be pulling me all kinds of directions. And if you're focusing on 5 things, you'll end up focusing on nothing. And if you focus on nothing, you will get nowhere. Now, along with that, I believe in the principle of what I call alignment, and we talked about that in an early video. So often, our culture doesn't understand the spiritual part at all, which is why we spent quite a bit of time on that, and we'll talk about it again in this video. But then we get into the will part, that soulish part where I'm just going to choose to do it, and if I choose hard enough, I'll make it happen. And Levi, you could be the poster child of that because you chose hard, and it didn't get you anywhere.
Even now, I find myself trying to will myself to be a good person, try to will myself to be in the presence of God. And that's not how it works. And I find myself trying to do all these good works without the Holy Spirit, without God's touch. And it brings me to points of exhaustion and burnout. And yeah, willpower's hard for me to try to limit and partner with God in.
So I believe in getting your body into total alignment, your entire being, spirit, soul, and body into alignment in the one thing, within the one thing, and we'll define that as the video goes on. So I spiritually begin to connect with God, start doing some good things there. I've got my will. If all I have is my will, it's not going to be enough. Or how about this one? If all I have are habits. I love this one. A lot of times people talk about fake it till you make it. If it's not obedience, and we'll define that in a little bit, if it's just you going through some motions, it's not going to get the job done. You're going to fake it, and you're not going to fake it till you make it. You're going to fake it and not make it. So it's important. We're talking not about a simplistic thing. We're talking about your entire being getting into alignment in a way that as I start walking through this obedience, is actually going to impact my entire being, and I'm going to be able to get heart change because of that. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the meat of what we're talking about. And we've already been talking about the one thing, and we'll define that a little bit more as the video goes on, but let's jump to the word obedience, because that ends up being important. There's a huge difference between me faking it till I make it and trying to force myself through behaviors and the word obedience. This is not me choosing a pathway. This is me choosing to see something outside of myself, trusting that thing outside of myself, connecting with that thing outside of myself. And obviously, the first thing we think you should choose to trust is God. The second thing we believe you should choose to trust is godly people. And Levi, as you did, coming in, wow, I don't know how to do this. Maybe I need to listen to something outside of myself and have some accountability. Both of you are very strong-willed. You have a force of nature within yourselves. And so anytime a person is strong-willed, we tend to believe, oh, well, I can do this by myself. And frankly, that by myself language is some of the most destructive language that you can get into. And I love John chapter 1, verse 12 and 13, where it says, but as many as received him, to them he gave the right, some translations say power. He gave them the ability to become children of God. Again, I want to define that a little bit, to step into heart change, to step into his character, to step into his nature. To those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh. I like this because he doubles down on it. They didn't get there because of the will of the flesh. They didn't get there because of the will of man, but they got there because it was a gift from God. It was something that came from the outside. So when I get to that point of understanding, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I need to connect myself with a strength outside of us. Now we're beginning to really get into the meat of obedience, because it's not a set of works. It's me joining myself to God, to God's word, to his will for my life. It's me joining myself to people around me who hopefully have better outcomes, better fruit than I do. A lot of times the people that we're willing to join with, they're just like us. Those are the only people I can trust, which means that you're marrying their outcomes, which means that you'll keep getting the same kinds of outcomes you've always gotten. So you actually have to get out of your comfort zone on this one and connect with some people that you really don't want to connect with. Heather, how did that work out for you?
I think my willingness to be obedient and to be obedient to what the program was asking me to do and godly people were asking me to do, I really had to first trust in the goodness of God, trust in his provision and his plan for me. Because I'd been burned by people too many times, and I wasn't willing to put my trust in a group of people again. But I did trust that he had led me here and that his grace was going to cover me here and that he had me here for a reason and for a purpose. And that was enough for me to be willing to trust enough to be accountable in those areas that we talk about here, to be accountable for my time, Levi, signing in and out, to be accountable for my relationships, and God slowly started to, and my finances. That was a new one for me. That was enough for me to slowly start to be still here and to settle in and to start. I just had to trust that I was here because God wanted me here. And I wouldn't be here if God didn't want me here. And God wants my good. So no matter who you are or what kind of schemes you've got against me, God's going to take care of me. And then he started placing people in my life and softening my heart to some individuals who I trusted had my best in mind. And I was able to start opening my heart again to some people. Still not everybody. I'm still pretty guarded with most people. But there are a few that God has shown me are trustworthy, that are faithful, that I can count on.
I'm glad you touched on those key relationships. My experience was a little different than yours. I hadn't previously really had a supernatural connection to God. So when I got here, I learned much of God's characteristics through those couple of key relationships, those godly people that were in my life that really exhibited characteristics that you could trust. I felt like they trusted me, even though I hadn't done anything to deserve it. I felt like they loved me, even though I hadn't done anything to deserve it. And I began to see God through the people around me, and that opened my eyes to more of that supernatural.
I think, first of all, we don't advocate that you trust everyone. You can trust everyone to respond according to who they are, according to where their heart is. And if someone's ungodly, you don't want to trust them. So you do need to look for outcomes. You look for positive outcomes. You look for godly people. So that's an important thing. We do not recommend that. But the first law of heart change that we talk about is trust enough. I love that word. Trust enough what? To be accountable. That's such a powerful thing. Once I step into that place of accountability, I'm stepping into a level of, and the key word here is obedience. If it's just me doing something that I think is good, it's fake it till you make it. But when it's me joining myself with someone else through trust and drawing strength, now that word obedience becomes much more powerful. Then we get to another one-liner. In the end, the body wins. I can have that spiritual connection to God and really have a temporary high. Spiritual presence is very temporal. It can show up, you can have a flash, you can be on top of the world, and it can be gone in less than 30 seconds. I can come out of that and just will myself to, I'm going to fight through this time. This time I'm going to respond to the spiritual thing God has done. But it really comes down to what I believe in your deepest, darkest areas. If you don't join your strength with other people around you, with certainly God and other people around you, you won't have what you need to overcome. And that joining of strength comes through obedience. It comes through trust. It comes through accountability. And people aren't willing to do that a lot of times. But these are the keys to drawing strength so that I now have the ability to overcome. That's why the whole phrase, the one thing obedience, it's really charged, and it's an important part of what we do.
I'm so dominant in will and in character that I really needed to move to a place of obedience to bring my heart to a place of submission so that I could begin to receive from God and the people around me. As long as I was in active rebellion, I was playing God of my own life, and my outcomes were going to continue to look like the trash fire that they were and continue to get worse. They say jails, institutions, and death, and that's where I was going.
Now that we're talking about the one thing obedience and the importance of it, now we have the biggest problem of all. How do I figure out what it is? Because it's not the same for everyone. And where we start with this actually goes back to what I call a driver. All of us have this internal driver. We have something in us that's stronger. It takes us towards our purpose. It takes us towards our calling. There's something deep within us. And actually, that driver actually is the key piece that causes woundedness to rise up. I believe that the deepest wounds specific to you, again, there are wounds that are generalized to all people. If someone's trying to kill you, that's pretty generalized to all people. If there's rape, if there's abuse, if there's different things like that, it goes to the safety. So everybody struggles with those kinds of things. But some of the deepest wounds in your life will revolve around this driver, where this is who God created me to be. This is who He called me to be. We have that instinctive knowledge within us. And when life begins to mash that, then we have what we had in the last video, which is the file drawers. Then you have patterns of woundedness. You have this pattern of, oh, you are disrespecting me. Well, if you're disrespecting me, what does that do? That tells me about you that you care about respect. That tells me that you want to be respected. You want to be seen. You want to be able to lead and to influence other people. So if your deep woundedness is in that area, it begins to tell you about a driver. And one of the first steps towards the one thing obedience is being able to identify these drivers that are like, wow, this is what makes me tick. When I can see what makes me tick, and we'll do this as a process through the video, now I can more accurately define, oh, wow, now I know what my one thing obedience needs to be. Levi, coming back to you, a lot of what made you tick was, I'm going to call it righteousness, justice, truth. I mean, there was just a fire within you that also it kind of comes out in what I call power, and a lot of times that goes. Those are your drivers, and once you start seeing that those are my drivers, oh, the thing that's going to get me heart change is this obedience, being accountable, following something outside of myself, which is not instinctive to me. It's not something that I ever would have done.
I had to move into a place of knowingly being powerlessness. And that's really hard for me to say about myself, to even describe myself in those words. Earlier I said submission, and that was hard to spit out. But no, you're right on track. I'm so power-oriented. I'm so authority-oriented that for heart change, I had to relinquish that within myself. I had to give other people that authority in my life, that power to make decisions over my life. As I said before, I was playing God, not just in my own life, but that began to run over onto other people around me's life. I was controlling to the point that I would try to be people's God.
With the one thing obedience, for it to be effective, then it goes right to that area. And similar to what you were saying, it feels wrong. It feels foreign. And what I say a lot of times about recovery, if it was easy, you would have already done it. So if it's the right one thing obedience, it's probably something that you've never tried, that feels foreign, that seems absolutely wrong, foolish, any other word that I want to add to it.
Some of my biggest wounds came out of that feeling of powerlessness. So to go back to the thing that wounded me, seems asinine.
One of the things that pastor says is if the one thing seems really hard, we've got the right one thing, right? So my two key file drawers that I've identified are betrayal and rejection. So they're about people, they're about relationship. And God had told me when I got here that I was here to do the work I could only do in community. And there was a part of me that was like, what are you talking about? I've been burned by everybody. What are you talking about? I didn't recognize that it took some time of just being obedient and sticking it out. That what that meant is for me to drop the vision and be right here, right now. I was going to have to be right here, right now in the face of betrayal and rejection. My file drawers were going to come open. And I mean, if it was just a tra-la-la, happy, everything is sunshine and butterflies, my one thing would not be hard for me at all. Oh, okay, I'll just stay here in La La Land. That sounds great. It had to be hard in order for me to be obedient to that.
I wouldn't have kept burning my life to the ground.
Right? Right? So I didn't know that. I mean, thank God that he doesn't tell me what's coming, all the time, because I probably wouldn't have been willing to be obedient at that point. I need you to stay right here while you are assaulted with all your worst fears in your face.
Again, if it doesn't show up, you won't grow up. I have to take that thing, get it surrendered to God. We're ahead of ourselves. That's a point a little bit later on. So I'm going to jump to point number 4, which is identify your struggle area in the spiritual flows list. Now, what we're doing here, we're giving you multiple ways to identify the one thing. So the first thing is to try to identify that driver, and that driver many times can clearly be seen in your areas of woundedness. A second way for us to identify that driver and that one thing area is the area of spiritual flows. And I've created a chart that has 7 major spiritual flows. There's also 21 on a longer list and 75 on a longer list. And sometimes it's easier to say, oh, that one's me. That's my struggle area. And these are negative because what? We're the best at seeing our flaws. We really get down on ourselves. It's easier to see these spiritual flows in the negative than it is in the positive.
This was really key for me. I was in such a degree of shutdown that I didn't really know me. I didn't know anything about a God-created self or purpose or any of this stuff. But I did know I had some tendencies. And to be able to look at a spiritual flow list and identify, hey, I really do this a bunch. And then to be able to read a little bit about the character that goes with that spiritual flow list began to help me understand myself. And as I began to understand myself, I could begin to cooperate with God and those around me in some real healing.
That's great in terms of heart change. Again, we come back to it. If you don't get change on the inside, I'm not just doing a one thing obedience. I'm cooperating with God. I'm cooperating with the people around me. I'm taking these negative flows and changing them from the negative to the positive that God intended.
I was one of them people that you couldn't punish into behavior change. You couldn't hit hard enough to get to act different. But when I began to cooperate with the people around me, it really opened my heart to something else. It's that willingness, that active participation in your own growth that really opens up possibilities to a life that you wouldn't have believed in before.
You have a strong vision piece. So when you are able to get some of this material and start seeing, oh, wow, I see the purpose, I see the direction, I see the change, now you could cooperate with it. When people are trying to force you into it, the power piece of you is like, you are not going to force me into anything. But when you could see the larger picture, then it was much easier for you to step in and go, yeah, I can do this thing. Now, let's go ahead and run through the 7 real quickly. Number 1 is pride. I call that the I can do it by myself. Number 2 is fear. and that really doesn't need much definition, nor does rebellion, nor does lust, except we're not talking about sexual lust here. We're talking about, Heather, you and I were talking yesterday, never satisfied. Nothing is ever enough. I need more stuff. I need more this, more that, never satisfied. That's the kind of lust. Yes, there is a subsection of sexual lust, but that never satisfied, when you brought that up yesterday, I thought, wow, that's powerful. That's a great description. Bitterness, again, I think all of us understand bitterness, critical spirit, selfish ambition. I mean, these are things that we're able to look at and go, okay, which of these 7 do I struggle with the most? And again, we have charts available. We have different information available. If you want to be in contact with us and get some more information, we can help you with that, because you need to be able to see from, oh, if I'm struggling with these, I have this driver. I have this core value that's underneath this thing. Let's just go back to pride real quick. If I'm a pride person, I care about reputation. Why would I care about reputation? Because I want to have impact on you. I want to be an influencer. There's a strong correlation between a pride person and leadership, a desire to be in leadership. So all of the gifts have that. We don't have time to really carry that out on this video the way we would like to. But as you take a look at these spiritual flows and you go, oh, wow, I really do struggle with pride, or I struggle with a critical spirit, all of a sudden it begins to tell you about who you are. And there will be a corresponding one thing obedience. If you struggle with critical spirit, there's a corresponding one thing obedience that this is what I need to follow through. The next point is this. The one thing obedience starts as surrender, but then builds into partnership with God. What's interesting to me, and I come back to this all the time, Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us have an instinctive knowledge that this is who I'm supposed to be. And some of the greatest pain that you will ever experience is, wow, I'm not measuring up. I'm not being who I should be. If I'm a compassion person, I have a sense that my compassion should be able to touch the people around me, and I should be able to have quality relationships. So when I'm not having quality relationships, everything begins to fall apart. Well, this whole thing really falls apart when we try to do this thing on our own. Romans 3:23, all have fallen short of the glory of God. God didn't create you to be a good person. He created you to be a God person, a God-connected person. So when God's Spirit is connecting with me, energizing my spirit, and that's flowing down through me the way it should, my lungs are working, it oxygenates my blood, and it goes through my entire body. I get that spiritual energizing. Now my will has a new ability to say, hey, maybe I can do this. And then I get into the one thing obedience. I'm getting my entire person lined up the way it should be. All of a sudden, I'm going to move towards partnership. Now, this point talks about it starts with surrender. What happens? Almost everybody starts with pride. What's pride? I can do it by myself. If you don't believe that exists, check out any 3-year-old that you want to see. Me do it. No, I do it. You get all of that language and it's just so instinctive to us. Heart change really begins when I start seeing my need for God, which, Levi, you've talked about. I start seeing my need for God, surrendering to God, surrendering to godly people, connecting, because now I'm capable of trusting. Now I'm capable of partnership. The one thing obedience is going to start with this place of surrendering what you think is your gift, your purpose, your God's gift to the world. You take that and you realize, I can't do this apart from God. I can't do this apart from godly people. I need help.
So I've been a Christian leader in a recovery program for about 5 years now. And I've been watching the death to self process that has gone on in me. I get to minister and partner with a lot of really neat people that come through the program. And there's a select few that does something to my heart. And I start trying to save them by myself. And to watch God move in my heart over a period of years and try to grow me up in that area where I'm starting to see that just my willpower is not enough, just my efforts is not enough, that I need a group of us to minister to people. And beyond that, I need a touch from God. And just seeing that process work its way out in me. And I still do it now. It's not something I could just suddenly stop being prideful. God grows us up.
Once I see that driver, that purpose, what do we all do? We run for it, and I'm going to prove myself. And that's where the wounds come from, when we fall short, when people don't respond to us. That's where I get into this zone where I'm just pressing and striving, and my leadership call and gift turns into pride. I'm a vision person, and that vision falls apart, and so now I'm having trouble with my future vision, and I fall into fear. Every one of those things that are spiritual flows that we talked about, they have a God design, but the negative that I talked about is you falling short, and that almost always comes back to me trying to do it by myself, me pressing too hard. Once I identify my giftedness, I literally have to take that, lay it down before God and go, oh God, I can't do this by myself.
One of my first big decisions as a leader was to try to encourage a buddy of mine to go to church on Sunday by beating on his door until it ruined relationship. That was just an example of me trying to do this leadership, godly influence thing on my own.
Let me add one more thing, as if we needed more to make it more confusing. But you've got your file drawer, you've got your wounds, you've got your spiritual flows. There's a third area in the book Greater Than. We go into this in great detail. All of us have a calling. All of us have something that's instinctive to us. And one of those callings is the whole idea of proclaiming, fighting for what is right. And Levi, you exhibit a lot of those traits, and so that's a part of who you are. Another one is serving, meeting the need. Another one, understanding, coaching, nurturing, creating, organizing, connecting, supporting. That's another way that you can begin to identify, oh, this is who I am. Now I need to take this gifting, I need to take this calling and surrender it to God. And that surrender process also will point you to the one thing, obedience. So now we've given you 3 different ways. Identify your wounding, take a look at your spiritual flows, take a look at your spiritual gifts. All of those should come together into a common place where I can begin to see, oh, for me to get rid of my wounding, I need to do this. For me to come out of these negative spiritual flows, I need to do this. For me to surrender my gifting to God, I need to do this. And what you're going to find, especially if you're in the right ballpark, you're going to find that all 3 of those come together into, are you ready for it? A one thing, obedience, where I can begin to focus. And if you have the right thing, here's what you will find. It comes directly out of who you are. It comes directly out of who God created you to be. It's going to end up being the one thing for the rest of your life. Now, many times people have what I call a layer over the top. That, let's just say someone in particular just wounded them in relationship at a deep level. And they'll deal with that layer, and it's like it's gone, and then we get down to the one thing, obedience. That does occasionally happen. Sometimes there's a covering layer. But the vast majority of the time, if you've found your one thing, obedience, you're going to find, oh, this is me the rest of my life. Why? Because it's you surrendering your giftedness to God in a way that says, God, I can't do this apart from you. Frankly, the more mature you get, the harder that is to do sometimes. Because as you get more mature, you start looking in the mirror and go, ooh, I'm pretty tough. I'm doing a good job. And about that time, God backs up and says, okay, we'll see how tough you are and how good of a job you can do. And so then I'm back. I don't care if I've been in the faith 30 years, 40 years. I'm back to my one thing, obedience of, okay, God, I remember I need to submit this to you.
It starts with surrender. The first thing that I have to be convinced of is that my way doesn't work. And as painful as that experience of building it up and then tearing it down and building it up and tearing it down over and over and over again has been the thing that it brought me to was this conviction. God, my way does not work. It does not work, and it's not going to work. And please guide me into how you would have it unfold. So that one thing, obedience of be right here, right now. What? Just get up and go to work every day and pay my bills and like be a responsible human and okay. Doesn't make any sense to me because I have this calling. I got to go do this. Okay. Rein me in.
You know you have the right one thing when it's starting that surrender process, number one, and number two, which is our sixth point, the one thing obedience will build your character. It'll get you heart change. It'll build a depth there, making you capable of true partnership with God. When someone starts out as a new believer, a lot of times they're zealous and they're on fire and I'm going to win the world. And I mean, it's like they're doing all kinds of behaviors, maybe using language, doing different kinds of things that are totally undercutting their witness the entire time that they're doing it. They don't understand that once I see the driver and I start surrendering it, it's going to take time for me to walk through this process in a way that I begin to grow up. And so that's so important for us to begin to see that and get our one thing obedience and really begin to get this thing going in the right direction. I want to just give you a few of these just quickly so that you at least have them on the video. If you're a proclaiming truth person, you need to come under godly authority. We've already talked about that. And if I learn to come under godly authority, what's going to happen? I'm going to develop godly character. See, each of these, the one thing obedience, is the thing you need more than any other thing to develop that godly character so that this whole thing works. What do we want? We're an instant society. We want today Jesus, right now Jesus, fix the problem, boom, zap, finished, no issues, done. No, how about if we do one thing obedience that will literally last the rest of your life? If serving is where you are, you need to guard against offense. You'll get offended at people because as a servant, they're going to start taking advantage of you when you serve them. And so then you'll be angry because they didn't thank you and you'll be struggling with that. And you need to focus on listening and loving. If you're a coach, slow it down. If you're an encourager, you've got to slow it down. Heather, live in the moment. You know, those things are very, very important. If you're a nurturer, be vigilant against moving into forms of control. Control becomes really manipulation. Those things become important. And learn servant leadership. I throw another one in there. Learn to be a seed sower. Your nurturers tend to need the people they're working with to get better. And as soon as that happens, it's called codependency, and it gets really sick very quick. Organizers need to stay engaged with people seeing hearts and not just looking at outcomes. If the organizers don't see people, don't see hearts, they become very perverse very fast. And connecting, if you're a connecting, compassion, supporting kind of person, you've got to stay engaged when the wound comes. And that is so powerful. What happens? No, go into bitterness. I isolate. I cut you off. There's basic one thing obediences that I'm describing here that if you'll get into this pattern, what will it do? It'll take your gift area. It will surrender it to God. It will cause you to stay engaged in the way that you should be engaged over a long period of time. As you stay engaged, you'll begin to grow up. As you grow up and you mature, now life is going to flow out of you on a regular basis. This is not just a one thing obedience that you're going to do one thing. No, you're going to do one thing that's going to cause you to surrender to God. It's going to cause you to partner with people in a way that you grow your character. And when you get heart change, that's when good things start to happen. The final step on the process, are you ready? I could just use one word, repeat. Get heart change by repeating the surrender and growth process over and over again. Again, we don't like that, but Isaiah 28 lays out that we're line upon line, precept upon precept. And in that chapter, he says, who am I going to teach knowledge? Those just weaned from the breast? they're not able, they're not ready. You have to put this line in place, then you put this line in place, then you put this line in place. We talk about in the program a lot of times about baselines. Okay, do you have your baselines in place? Are you establishing new normals? Are you establishing a new place of conscience? We don't like this. We want it to be fast. We want it to be immediate. And if you go back to spiritual presence, it is fast. It is immediate. I come to God. I ask forgiveness. I pray. I feel the radiance of God. I feel the energy of God. And now I'm ready to move on. And I believe everything's changed. And what I will tell you is, no, you don't have heart change until everything's in alignment. Until I renew my mind and I begin to understand those belief systems that we talked about in previous videos, so that now I can actively understand and cooperate with things. I've got to renew my mind. I've got to purge the emotional junk, and I've got to get healing there. I've got to get my will pointed the right direction. And then finally, I have to end up at this place of obedience, because it's not complete until it hits your feet. In the end, the body wins. If I don't step into this role, every experience that I had is going to be fleeting, it's going to disappear, and it's going to make it look like God doesn't love me. It's going to make it look like God doesn't care. It's going to make it look like my experience was actually a fraud.
It seems like at every major step in my growth that I've had to come back to this place of authority. And it's like God re-challenges me with, are you going to come under authority again? I can think about at my previous job, when I began to step into leadership, there was a coming under authority. I can think of this job, when I stepped into it, there was a re-coming under authority. There's times in my life where it's easy, where the steps are easy, but then there's times where it's like a major recommitment, like God really wants to know if your heart's still in this.
The pride and the fear are definitely the two. They're like neck and neck with me. I think one steps in to compensate for the other. They kind of play a dance within me all the time. And I see the same thing over and over and over again. God calls me. It's about trust in his vision for me, in what he wants for me, and allowing him to do it. So that one thing, obedience of drop the vision, his vision, not mine, and be right here, right now, his timing, not mine, is constantly leveling my pride. Are you going to trust me? Are you going to trust me? Are you going to trust me? But it also, here's the blessing, it also alleviates the fear and the anxiety that comes with me do it. And I'm going to mess it up, and I'm not going to do it right. And all. So that game that they play, when he calls me over and over again to trust his vision, to trust his timing, to trust his will for me, it's healing my fear. It's healing. Not only is it leveling my pride and humbling me, but he's healing this anxiety that has plagued me from childhood, that I didn't even recognize I was on this hamster wheel with, and could never get in front of the fear, no matter how much I tried in my own will.
There is a really neat shared accountability that comes with partnership. When I'm relying solely on myself, and power's my thing, willpower specifically. When I'm relying solely on my willpower to try to force these things to happen in my life, when they don't work, I am solely to blame. But when I'm partnering with God and those around me, in the event that we believe we're on the track for God's will and then it doesn't work, there is a shared level of responsibility to it that's not there with just that solo mission.
That partnership with God requires the entire man. And again, there's cultish theologies that pit the spirit against the natural realm and all kinds of things like that. In biblical spirituality, God's presence, God's spirit is expressed through the natural realm. And I love Matthew 16 and 18, where he says, whatever you bind on earth, physical body, is bound in heaven. So that gets back to the importance of the one thing, obedience. I can have that spiritual encounter. I can even change my thinking, But if my body doesn't go along with it, as a Christian, I will be a hypocrite. I will not have authority. My testimony will not have impact. But when I finally get it down to the body level, and it's not fake it till you make it, it's not me just trying to be a good person, it really is alignment. It is me hearing from God, being around godly people, surrendering, submitting, connecting, partnering. These are incredibly powerful words. Again, it's not fake it till you make it. It's not just start doing this one thing. When I get there, and I begin to do Matthew 16, whatsoever I bind on earth, whatsoever I loose on earth, whatever actions and words are coming through me, now my prayers become powerful. Now my words with other people, my actions become powerful. That's when we start seeing God intervening. You guys know that this is a big one with me. When we just go to church week after week and nothing changes. There's no manifestation of God. There's no change of God. There's no power of God. There's no life of God. People become cynical very quick. And that's where our world is now. So if we can't get it to that last level, in the end, the body wins, where we're doing the one thing, obedience. Everything we've done up to this point will fall apart. This is a message our world needs to hear. If you get heart change, you won't just change your behavior. Obviously, the one thing obedience looks like, it sounds like we're targeting your behavior. We're not. We're targeting heart change. We're targeting you coming under the Most High God. We're targeting you partnering with other believers. And when there's a coming together and there's a joining of love and life together, that's when the gospel really begins to work. That's when there's power. That's when there's life. The one thing obedience really is incredibly huge in terms of whether or not you will break through or you'll just stay back in what I call a clickbait area where, well, let me just throw some things out to you that sound really spiritual and look good and try to get some attention for myself. You will start making a difference in life when you get that heart change. Your behavior is solid, it's consistent, and now my prayers are powerful. Everything begins to work when the one thing of obedience begins to come into the right place, and I'm partnering. You too can get heart change and change your life.